Turns out a VS Code fork can be a billion-dollar company. We have a couple of them now, including my editor of choice, Cursor. I am also an investor, just to be clear, but I'm an investor in Microsoft too, which is the company we're mostly here to talk about today. Because a bunch of people using Microsoft's extensions for VS Code, well, they are for VS Code, but they're using them in other editors, they started seeing this error. All of a sudden, people who are using the C++ extension for VS Code inside of Cursor or Windsurf can't anymore. It's not just the C++ extension. There's a bunch of others too, including .NET and a handful of other things. And yeah, people are unhappy. This isn't as simple as it seems, though. It's not just Microsoft randomly showing up and trying to ruin everything for their competition. There's some subtlety here that I think is worth engaging in. And as much as you might think I am biased, I'm going to be a little bit harsh towards Cursor here too. So since I have more money in Microsoft than Cursor, I'm hurting a bit right now on the stock market. So let's hear a quick word from today's sponsor before we dive in. If you're building a small app with not a lot of users, today's sponsor is not for you. But for those who are actually trying to make a product that is used by enterprises, you should definitely check out WorkOS. These guys get auth. And when I say that, I don't mean they make it easy to set up. They do, but they solve a lot of the other problems with auth that you're going to run into, especially as you try to target large businesses. These guys can handle all the SAML and SSO compliance crap that I don't even know all the acronyms for. And they do it really well. Somebody who's been trying to set up more of this myself, it's not been fun. Radar is dope, by the way. It's one of the better ways to protect against bots. I regret not using it for T3 chat. Legitimately, it could have saved me days, if not a week or two of work. Don't take my word for it, though. There's a pretty absurd list of companies here that are using WorkOS. Everyone from Cursor and Vercel to big companies like Carta and OpenAI. It's nuts. Even Plaid is using them now, which is crazy if you think about it. If you're trying to grow your revenue, you're trying to sell to big businesses, and all of these pieces are stuff they're going to ask for, or they're just going to ignore you because you don't have it. Fun fact, most of the time you work with these enterprise companies, they need to integrate all the auth stuff on their side. And doing that can take weeks of back and forth and a bunch of hand-holding around getting the right URLs in the right places, and it's chaos. Unless you use WorkOS, then it's 2 clicks. You can just add an admin portal to your app for the IT people at the other company you're selling to get everything set up on their side. I am thinking through all the time I've spent doing this stuff in the past and regretting not using WorkOS. I do love the visualization here. All the chaos of helping people set up the right auth in the right places. Where do they find the right setting in Okta? All that. Or you can just click 2 buttons. If your users matter, you should take care of them correctly. Check out WorkOS today at soydev.link/WorkOS. So what is going on here? This is a picture from a GitHub issue that somebody opened on the Cursor repo. This is upsetting because the C++ built-in extension for just basic syntax highlighting and all the other things you expect no longer works. So if you're a C++ dev using Cursor, this just suddenly broke for you, and that sucks. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Obviously, this is not great. A handful of people would go back to this old version, and it was able to work correctly. There was also the install specific version dropdown that seems to be kind of gone now, which is frustrating. It's going to be fun. I know more than most because I've published a VS Code extension that's somewhat popular. So I have a lot of thoughts here. Seems like they're even suppressing different older versions when you try to install different ones, which is fun. Thankfully, at the very least, they were able to get the C++ extension working, and they have a plan going forward in order to make things work long term. Very excited for all of that. But I want to break down what's going on and how we actually got here. We need to start with the editor that kind of kickstarted this whole VS Code type revolution. I want to see if you guys can guess in chat which editor I'm thinking of that kickstarted all of this. Adam. Very close, guys. Here we are, Sublime Text. So my first hot take people are going to be pissed about is that Sublime Text started the minimal extensible editor revolution. Not discounting what like Vim and NeoVim and Emacs and all of those things did, but yeah, that's what I thought. Sublime Text was before even NeoVim, which is obviously significantly more extensible than traditional Vim. So I stand by my statement. The idea of a minimal editor that is extensible with a community-run marketplace really started with Sublime Text. That said, Sublime Text didn't really have this functionality built in. It was kind of modded in by the community. Vim was extensible is the most you've shown your age in a minute, Ethan. As smart as you are, you've not been around long enough to know how miserable it was to try and add anything to Vim. There's a reason the whole community moved over to NeoVim. The extensibility in Vim was absolute garbage. I would even make the argument that NeoVim felt more necessary to exist because Sublime showed how powerful a community like that could be. Yeah, VimL is terrible. I'm happy you guys get it. Anyways, Because Sublime Text was so, frankly, better than anything before it, but also wasn't built for this level of extensibility, and most importantly, wasn't open source, some changes needed to happen. So Sublime had community extensibility, free to use, fast as hell, minimal too. This combo was very, very interesting to the greater like software dev world, where it was free, fast, community extensibility, and generally speaking, kind of minimal. Big part of the community extensibility is that it's not just like possible, but the tools are relatively accessible. It was a bit of a mess with Sublime simply because it wasn't originally built into the editor. It was a community thing that you would run in Sublime to add the extension capabilities, but very quickly became more and more core to Sublime and the community around it. The community accessibility was huge in Sublime, but there was a catch: not open source. Sublime Text was a paid editor, still is to this day. It's free to use, but every 20 saves, if I recall, a little pop-up comes up saying, hey, you should pay for me. And even when I was like working at Twitch, I still left it in the free tier because it was just easier than going through the process getting a license paid for by Twitch. So even though it is free to use, it is a paid editor, worth considering. Anyways, because of all of these things and a certain company that cared a lot about open source, you might have heard of them, GitHub, decided to join in. And GitHub introduces a new editor named Atom. Atom was built around community extensibility. So it was even easier to add extensions, create them, and all of it was in JavaScript. The reason it was in JavaScript wasn't just because they wanted to make it more accessible. It's because the team who built it was mostly a web development team. And if they wanted to make an editor that worked across all platforms, they'd either have to hire native engineers for Linux, for Windows, and for Mac, or they'd have to figure out how to make it work with web technologies, which is why they invented a certain technology you may have heard of, Electron. Yes, if you didn't know it, Electron got its name because it's one of the most important pieces of Atom, the editor. It was built to make it easier to distribute one program written with web technologies across all platforms. And it is the only reason Atom could succeed. It's also one of the biggest reasons that I think Microsoft started paying attention to GitHub. It was fully free and open source. Big deal. Very big deal. Still relatively minimal. And obviously, since it's fully free and open source, you can just use it for whatever you want. This made Atom a very, very compelling new option, even though, let's be real, it was a bit slow. Especially compared to Sublime, Atom didn't always feel great to use. It was also missing a lot of like the deeper integrations you would expect from a traditional IDE. Sublime kind of was as well, but more of that had been flushed out by the community at that point. Atom didn't really have things figured out for the traditional IDE experience. Also, its startup times are garbage. I specifically remember that. I personally was finding myself still using Sublime for the most part, simply because I liked the support I had for gigantic files. I already had my extensions and everything set up, and I didn't feel like I was getting an upgrade moving to Atom. But Atom really broke new ground, and I know a lot of devs that's first editor ended up being Atom, which is still kind of crazy when I think about it, especially because Atom is now dead. This trend of minimal extensible editors kind of forced Microsoft to think about where their editors stood. Time for the next controversial take I'm sure people will love. Visual Studio. To be clear, Visual Studio, not code, not VSC, just standard Visual Studio. It's one of the best and most comprehensive IDEs ever made. As someone who did their time in Eclipse, I've always been kind of floored at the level of capability and quality that exists in Visual Studio. It was so far ahead of everything else. Going from the entirely broken, unstable experience using Dreamweaver, and honestly even FrontPage back in the day, to Visual Studio with .NET was huge quality of life improvement. And it really helped pioneer what we think of as the modern IDE, with like a play button in the editor, with a test suite that you could run from the actual editor UI, and enough going on that you weren't in the terminal the entire time you were building. It was genuinely groundbreaking. It's still, to this day, one of the best IDEs ever made, and more importantly, one of the best IDE teams ever made. So imagine you're the exec in charge of this crew here. You know they have built one of the best editors ever, and that the team building it knows more about good editor experiences than almost anybody in the world. Yet you look over here, and what you see is that a ton of devs, especially earlier career devs, are hopping on this new wave with these open source, free, extensible editors that are a much worse experience than what you're providing with Visual Studio. You start to think. You start to think a lot. And when you look at Atom and you realize its biggest flaw, it's not Electron. It's that the team building it is a web dev team. Sure, the fact that it's a web dev team resulted in them using Electron, but it also resulted in it not being the best editor it possibly could be. And that is why Microsoft starts VS Code. The reason for this is that it was very clear the community wanted tools like Atom and Sublime, and Visual Studio in its current state would never, ever fit what we're looking for as a more minimal editor. Like, I can't imagine building a traditional website in Next.js using Visual Studio. It just feels like funny. So they started VS Code as like Visual Studio Lite almost, with the explicit goal of making it easier to get started with and make more extensions for a Visual Studio-like experience. It was very much positioned as Visual Studio for web devs, which I honestly think is a really good decision at the time, as web dev stuff was getting more and more popular, as React was starting to blow up, Node was getting more and more prominent too. It made a lot of sense for them to put a second editor out there to be the thing to deal with all those technologies, to get out of the way of Visual Studio. Even just as a way of keeping Visual Studio from getting cluttered, I think this strategy made a lot of sense. To describe the characteristics of Visual Studio Code with my little dropdown, I'm just going to copy paste this one for no reason in particular. VS Code. Built around community extensibility, Electron, fully free and open source, less minimal, includes useful tools for TS in particular. And it was a bit slow, less so. Is it as fast as Sublime? No. But is it as slow as Atom? Absolutely not. It's relatively solid performance. I find that the things that slow down VS Code tend to not necessarily be VS Code, rather the extensions you're running, TypeScript server, those types of things, but those can be slow in other places too. There is one other important piece here though. TypeScript 1. I don't think anyone expected TypeScript to be the gigantic winner it was, including Microsoft and the TypeScript team. It's pretty absurd the level at which TypeScript just came in and dominated the space. And VS Code was, without question, the editor for TypeScript. That kind of gave them a win by default with TypeScript's success. But VS Code as an editor was good enough that the whole community started moving over to it. But I would say almost inarguably, VS Code's initial success came from the fact that TypeScript was doing so well that people wanted the best TypeScript editor, and VS Code was obviously that, because there was a lot of alignment between those teams. VS Code showed that the structure of Atom could be executed differently and made into something way better and way more powerful. And I honestly think it's one of the biggest flexes ever that the Visual Studio team could come in, take someone else's playbook, and make something so much comically better that eventually the alternatives just shut down. And that's what happened. Atom is officially dead, deprecated, no longer being maintained. The company that built it, GitHub, got bought by Microsoft. In my opinion, there's a lot of reasons that Microsoft bought GitHub, and most of them make a lot of sense. The biggest by far is developer sentiment, getting a product that developers really like, because at the time, Microsoft was struggling to get developers to like them. But one of those pieces was, without question, Electron. And it's funny how this all comes full circle back to Microsoft and where we are today. But remember the thing I just said. VS Code shows that a good team can take someone else's playbook, execute 10 times better, and win huge. Because again, VS Code and Atom, very, very, very similar. And it is effectively inarguable that VS Code would have happened without Atom. Like, it just wouldn't. VS Code is Microsoft's attempt at re-rolling the Atom playbook. And the only reason we don't call Microsoft an evil copycat is because they then bought GitHub. So it's fine. And seems like chat just realized where we're going here. Cursor pulled the VS Code. Yes, the same way that just absolute absurd amounts of work went into making Electron a capable platform for building real applications, and then VS Code gets to just piggyback on all of that. Cursor is doing the same with VS Code. It's weird when you think about it this way, but I do really believe it. This is the benefit of open platforms, is you allow for innovation to happen on higher levels like that. And I think the innovation that we've seen with a tool like Cursor, despite the fact that I'm an investor, obviously account for my biases, but I'm also, again, have way more money in Microsoft right now, and it's hurting. So yeah, Cursor really meaningfully improved the editor experience I was having. And I was skeptical at first. I churned probably 3 times before Cursor really stuck for me. And now it's just essential to the way I write code. I have a video plan where I talk more in depth on how my way of writing code has changed so meaningfully since I got more Cursor and AI pilled. But I spend way more time thinking and planning how I want to build the thing. I'll sometimes have multiple plans. And then I can go into Cursor and try out these different paths way quicker and figure out which one actually ends up making sense. It's meaningfully increased the quality of the code I'm putting out, not because it's a better coder than me, but because I can try more things. It's changed the way I code, and I'm very, very thankful to be using Cursor every day. Now that we've hopefully established this, you might see where we're going. Cursor is built on VS Code roughly the same way in many senses that VS Code was built on top of Electron and Atom. It's fair to say that VS Code wouldn't exist without Atom, and obviously Cursor wouldn't exist without VS Code. Kind of, because funny enough, believe it or not, they originally weren't using VS Code for the base of Cursor. They were using something based on top of CodeMirror, but they moved over to VS Codium. And when they did that, they were using the OpenVSX marketplace, which was created originally by our friends over at, of all places, Eclipse, because they wanted a better embedded editor for a bunch of different platforms. So they built Eclipse Theo, which is a vendor-neutral fork of VS Code, and they introduced OpenVSX, which is an open extension marketplace for VS Code formatted extensions, which are VSX files. And that's what they used for Cursor. Used previously, to be clear, because starting near the end of 2023, they moved over to the Cursor marketplace. Here's where the speculation is going to start a bit, though, because we don't really technically know what the Cursor marketplace is. As far as I know, there was never any way for a developer to publish their extension on the Cursor marketplace directly. And it also seems like a handful of extensions weren't there because they had this post they made at least as far back as November or before. This article's existed on the Cursor site since at least October of last year. Not quite 2023, sadly, when a lot of this stuff is relevant. So it seems like they got to do whatever they did smoothly for around a year. Then there were enough questions about certain extensions that were missing that they published this article that showed the solution. You'd go to the Microsoft Store, you would click the download button to download the extension from the marketplace, you would open the extensions pane in Cursor and then drag it in. This article is still up right now. Shows you where to go, where to drag it, and how to do it. So let's try it. Let's grab mine, material theme sue. Material theme, but I won't sue you. Here we are. So we're here. And then what's the next step? Under resources, click download extension. Let's do it. Resources, Here's where the fighting back starts. Microsoft has been making sly changes to make it harder and harder for others to build the VS Code marketplace in. And this is one of those changes. They removed the download button. And I know for a fact this has been there for a while now because I was trying to do this in order to get the possibly spyware material theme from the original creator a while back, like end of year a while back, and I couldn't. So they've had the download button gone for a while now. So this article's technically not useful anymore because the download extension button is gone. Microsoft has cracked down on your ability to download the extension files outside of the official Microsoft Store in VS Code. The reason that this hasn't affected many people, I think, is because of where most Cursor users came from. Most Cursor users came from VS Code. This is starting to change now that the whole vibe coding thing is going on, but for the longest time, Cursor users didn't come from Visual Studio, they didn't come from Xcode, they almost all came from VS Code. And since setting up Cursor will allow you to import all of your things, like your extensions, from VS Code, I don't think many people had to actually go search for and install their extensions. So they never ran into a handful of these problems. Were those extensions getting updated properly? Probably not. But as someone who ships software people install on their devices, most people gladly, blindly run very out-of-date software without even knowing. And I am pretty sure a big part of why this didn't become a drama until recently is because most of the Cursor users that have extensions that they have strong feelings about just had them all come in from VS Code anyways. But that's not the important details here. Back to September in 2023, it is my belief, and again, total speculation here, I don't have confirmation, but it is my belief that the Cursor marketplace is a wrapper around the official Visual Studio marketplace, which, again, total speculation here. I'm not saying this is somebody who has inside information or any additional details from the company, so I went out of my way to not contact either parties as to not bias me. This is very, 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 very likely to be against Microsoft's terms of service. So remember I just said it's very, 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 very likely that Microsoft's terms would explicitly prevent what Cursor was doing? I'm less sure, because this version of the Studio Marketplace terms of use from 2021 doesn't have anything that would suggest what they were doing wasn't really allowed beyond this Microsoft's publicly supported interfaces, including without limitation through automated harvesting, spidering, or scraping the marketplace. So scraping was not allowed. And they say password, hacking, mining, whatever, not allowed. They are not very explicit that this isn't okay, that wrapping it isn't okay. I thought there would be a much more explicit call out here. There isn't. And I'm saying that so confidently because they published an update in January of this year that is much, much stricter. You may not import, install, or use offerings published by Microsoft or GitHub or Microsoft affiliates in any product or services except for the in-scope products and services. That's a very, very explicit call out. Very big difference here. I can now pretty confidently say that up until these changes were published, making a wrapper for the official vscode marketplace, iffy on where it stands terms-wise. They wouldn't have made this change otherwise, but it does make a lot of sense. So, yeah. My guess is this change might have been planned or started earlier. It's possible they even contacted Cursor and told them, hey, by the way, we're going to be making these changes. We're going to be more restrictive. And my guess is that that was when they made the move over to using the OpenVSX marketplace. And that's when people started reporting in November that their extension wasn't showing up because they only had published it on VSC's official marketplace, not on the OpenVSX marketplace. And again, I think this didn't become a big story then because most people just got their extensions from VS Code, and the important ones for things like C++ support and Python support would all be bundled by the editor directly. That is what changed, and that is what's scary here. April 2023, Cursor moves from CodeMirror to VS Code. September 2023, Cursor introduces the Cursor Marketplace, which we believe likely a wrapper of the official marketplace. Up until then, it was using OpenVSX. At this point, they built their Cursor Marketplace, which I believe was a wrapper. Then I'll vaguely say September 2024. It's actually, I think October is more confirmed, or at the very least, we know for a fact it's November. So I'm just going to say November. November 2024, Cursor's Marketplace is now based on OpenVSX. Official extensions can't be searched for in editor. This is also the same time that they published that article I showed before, how to install any VS Code extension in Cursor. My suspicion is that all of these things happened around the same time because either they were expecting a terms of service change or it had already happened and we just don't have logs of when that TOS existed. So as far as we know, it was January 2025 where Microsoft publishes stricter TOS for Marketplace. They have changed the name to be a bit more generic, and it also included the NuGet stuff that they own. But this was when we know the new terms were out. Here's the earliest confirmation. 64 days ago, so this would have been early February, the change was made where you couldn't download from extensions on the VS Code store. Also interesting is Isidoran's hopping in here. He's been super helpful with me with all the chaos around the material theme stuff, so I do trust him a lot. So when he says that one of the main reasons for removal of the download extension button was that it wasn't supporting pre-release extensions because of how it was doing the download of the newest version, which was problematic for splitting version types and having pre-release versus the main version. It would just always download the latest, which wasn't always the right thing. Again, February, confirmed by the Microsoft team, they did remove the download button, but they had internal reasons and tickets that made this happen. So February, Microsoft removes the download button from the browser version of the marketplace. And this is where my conspiracy theory starts. And I'm just going to drop it now and I'll fulfill it later. I don't think this was one decision at Microsoft to hurt all of these forks. I think this is a lot of teams that aren't necessarily orchestrating together, making decisions that previously wouldn't have mattered because VS Code was VS Code, but the change of what the role of the VS Code platform is has resulted in certain actions that likely were taken for other reasons, looking like an attack on something like Cursor. So my conspiracy is that I don't think this is fully intentional. We'll get to why I think that as we go. So February 2025, the download button's been removed. What happens next? So nothing happens in March as far as I know. But at the start of April, people start seeing the error that I opened this video with. The C++ extensions may only be used within Microsoft Visual Studio, Visual Studio for Mac, Visual Studio Code, Azure DevOps, and all these other Microsoft products, clearly being restricted from these other things. And to be clear, this is always in their terms, and also of note, the license for the C and C++ extension for VS Code was never open source. It's a source available license. They never open sourced their C and C++ language extensions because they're very complex and obnoxious and part of other Microsoft stuff. The fact that they're source available is cool, but they are not open source, to be very, very clear. Wait, is that true? Because this is MIT licensed. I'm now confused about the gap in the licensing here. Like, can I build and use this, or does it pull in things? Okay, the runtime licenses. Okay, so the runtime is licensed differently. The extension isn't. It's confusing. So if somebody was to fork this or set up an auto builder for this, an embed system for it, I wouldn't be surprised if they accidentally did that, assuming that they would be following the license. Because if you go here, you click license, it's MIT licensed, doesn't seem too suspicious. Even here, the binary files are included in the official VSX files distributed by Microsoft. They're governed by more restrictive proprietary licenses. Makes sense. But I even instinctively glanced over that and assumed it was MIT, which it's not. And I'm sure that is the case for a handful of these. Like if I hop into the license here, Python debugger is MIT. The Python extension is only available in binary form and released under a Microsoft proprietary license. You get the idea. The licensing for a lot of these extensions is confusing. It's worth noting that the .NET extension is actually something that requires a paid Visual Studio subscription because .NET's very deeply built into Visual Studio. So there are people who are paying for a Visual Studio subscription, but are using Cursor or Windsurf, and they're installing this extension, which is now restricted. People who are paying for it can't use it anymore, but also shows the weirdness of that relationship between these language servers, these extensions, and the actual editor. But I don't necessarily think this is just an attack on their competition. We'll go into why I think that in a bit. So as of April 2025, certain Microsoft language extensions are now being restricted on non-official editors. And this all seems pretty clearly planned, especially when you learn that right around the same time here, Microsoft releases agent mode plus MCPs for VS Code. It's like so obvious that the reason Microsoft's suddenly restricting all of these editors is because they added the functionality to VS Code and they want to be the better option, right? Kind of. And here is where we can finally now, with the whole timeline roughly structured, go into Theo conspiracy land. My honest suspicion here is that this guy, the download button being removed, this guy, the agent mode, and this guy, certain extensions being restricted, are three different decisions made by three different teams that have very little to do with each other. I do not believe this is some higher level orchestration, because you could very easily look at these three things and say, this is the Microsoft plan to destroy Cursor and Windsurf. I really don't think that's the case. Istorn very clearly from his reply here does not seem to be part of some internal plan to destroy Cursor. It is his understanding that at this moment, Cursor is just using OpenVSX. It's very clear just reading this that he's not part of some plan to destroy these forks. He's very transparent and real here about where things are at, what his understanding is, and why this change was made. They're not hiding the reasons here. We can speculate on the plan, but this isn't a thing that this well planned. That's not how these big companies work. This isn't Apple. There's no planned execution path. It's Microsoft. It's a bit of a mess. It's a beautiful mess, and they can make some awesome things, but I really do not think this is an example of Microsoft conspiring to destroy their competition. The only thing in here that I would say is clearly that is the agent mode and MCP stuff. But even that is like relatively un-Microsoft because Microsoft has a partnership with OpenAI, but with all the agent and MCP stuff that they just put into VS Code, the demos are using Claude and Anthropic, which is competition with their biggest partner, and Google. Microsoft and Google hate each other. So for them to be using Google models shows the level at which they want to make a good editor here and how hard they're willing to play to compete on the editor team directly. The team working on the language extensions, in particular, the C++ ones, the .NET ones, and I guess also potentially the Python ones, that's a different team, possibly for each of those languages, especially on the .NET side. And my honest guess, genuinely, this is what I think happened here. I suspect the .NET team was getting bug reports. And some of those bug reports were almost certainly from forks like Cursor or Windsurf. Since these forks all forked a very, very long time ago, as we saw back in April of 2023, it has been 2 years since Cursor moved to the VS Code base, which was a fork, and it was built up of VS Codium, which is a fork that might be even more outdated. Obviously, all of these projects try to backport meaningful, important changes, but if there is an improvement to how VS Code works and how it integrates with different language extensions, it's very possible that improvement doesn't make it to Cursor immediately, and it takes some time if it ever gets there. Same with Windsurf, same with all these other IDEs. And if you're the team that doesn't even use VS Code, much less all of these forks, you're primarily living in Visual Studio land, but since you're on the .NET team, you have to make this one extension for this one editor. All of a sudden, there's a bunch more bug reports that are coming from other editors. I sympathize with this problem because I deal with it too. I would guess that over half of our support tickets and questions are people asking why our captions are so broken because we use Google reCAPTCHA to make sure you don't destroy our service. reCAPTCHA has been working way better than what we had before, which was Cloudflare Turnstile. But the problem we have is that certain browsers, and by browsers I mean browser, and by browser I mean Brave, despite being based on Chromium and the whole V8 JavaScript Google ecosystem, it still regularly fails to properly pass with a decent score using reCAPTCHA. The way that CAPTCHA measures is with a number 0 to 1. If you're over 80%, you're almost certainly human. If you're over 70, you're probably human. Brave's the only browser that consistently scores like a 0.2 and a 0.3, and it's obnoxious. It's just genuinely so annoying that this one browser is a huge support burden for us, even though it makes up such a small percentage of our users. As such, I can very much sympathize with the .NET team if they are getting inundated with bug reports because one of these forks is using something old or using something wrong that causes their extension to break. That would very much lead to what we saw here, which is them throwing this giant annoying blocking warning whenever you do it. I know that because I've built services that do the same thing. This is Ping. This is my video call service for doing live content collaborations. And you might have noticed as soon as I went to sign in here, your browser isn't supported. It looks like you're using unsupported browser. You will not be able to join calls. Yeah, we were strict about it. And I'm signing in quick just to show. Then once I'm signed in and I try to join, we don't support your browser. Due to video quality and connection issues, we do not support video calls in your browser. Yeah, we're strict with it. And to be clear, if you are using Brave and you're a paid subscriber for T3 Chat, you'll have no issues because we don't enforce the CAPTCHAs for paid users. It's just a way for us to keep abuse way down, and it's helped beyond belief there. But with certain tools, certain browsers, certain engines, certain things you have to support, it's often the case that supporting it is more work than you could possibly get back in return, especially if there's no incentive to support it, especially if supporting it is giving a win to your competition. So I just genuinely think the .NET team who was maintaining that extension was tired of those bug reports and decided the quickest fix was to just disable it for those users and make it someone else's problem. And it makes all the sense in the world that that would happen. The removing of the download button one is weirder, but since we have that explanation from Isdorn, I don't think it's that big a deal. I do just genuinely think they removed it temporarily because they wanted to figure out a workaround to the split version branching problem. And now that workflow doesn't work anymore. Then combined with this, the two of these things together, especially when you remember they just put out the agent mode, this does feel like an obvious, clear, conspiratorial thing that Microsoft is doing. And I understand why people are so convinced this is the case. I've even seen people who called this a while back that are very proud of what they're saying now because they are certain they said this would happen, the free ride would end, and now it's over. And in many ways it is, to be clear. This is a very, very real moment where suddenly the VS Code platform is apparently not available to be used and wrapped to the same extent people wanted. one of the biggest reasons to do VS Code forks instead of building your own editor was so you had access to this whole extension marketplace. It's actually one of the biggest problems that Zed, the IDE, has, is that they don't have the ability to use the existing tools and technologies that people have built around VS Code. But it looks like these forks are limited in how much they have too. My guess going forward is that the future is going to look interesting. I think it'll be a combination of taking advantage of imports from VS Code, because that flow works well enough, encouraging more and more devs to start publishing their things on the open VSIX marketplace, because it's so important to have an open marketplace people can use to get these things. And I'm guessing we're going to see better open alternatives to the C++ runtime that is a proprietary embedded thing inside of the C++ extension. And I think this is going to hurt .NET in general. I saw a handful of .NET devs that were very, very burned here because they like .NET a lot, they like Cursor a lot, and the likelihood that a good .NET experience will exist in Cursor going forward is very, very low. I don't think Microsoft is in a position to do much to these other companies right now. I have seen speculation about Microsoft potentially suing them or making life harder for them. They really can't, and even if they could, it would hurt their brand and image too much to be worth it. Like, they still have to eat so much shit for the lawsuit against Netscape that I can't imagine them making a public optics mistake that would hurt their rep with developers that hard. Right now, people are like 50-50 on if they're mad at Microsoft versus mad at Cursor. They want to keep it that way. And the least they do, the better they look in this situation. And we have to remember the role of VS Code. Probably should have brought this up way earlier. VS Code was never, ever, ever meant to make money. Microsoft's plan with VS Code was at no point, we're going to charge for this and make a money printing machine, selling extensions and doing all this other stuff. Microsoft never had a plan to make money on VS Code. If anything, it hurt their advantage with Windows because it was the first time they were supporting a good editor that worked well on Mac. VS Code is not a project Microsoft started to make money. It's one they started to try and smooth out the branding and relationship they had with the developer community. Again, similar to TypeScript. TypeScript wasn't to make money, it was to improve their dev experience and also open source to improve their reputation with the developer world. And it worked wonderfully. VS Code is one of the best examples of Microsoft caring about developers and the tools and technologies they need to ship. They wanted to be loved by devs again, and they've not really made decisions around VS Code to make money. They've made decisions around VS Code to make devs happy in hopes that long term that will position Microsoft to make more money in the future. And I just don't see that changing. Obviously, when you look at a company like Cursor and see the valuation they just raised at, you get a little jealous and your instinct is to try and copy it or make it harder for them if you're competing. But I don't think that's the case here. I really don't think Microsoft's goal here is to destroy these other options and print a whole bunch of money as a result. I think they just want to make better dev tools. And I feel the same way with the agent mode and MCP stuff. Obviously, this is being driven by the success of Cursor and Windsurf. But I also think it's coming from the fact that the people working on it are just excited about it. I had a chat with a handful of the people working on this stuff recently, and they were so genuinely hyped about it. It's not just a big company trying to do this thing to destroy other people. It does feel like a team of people who are excited and care and are building things that they are excited about. And that was always the point of VS Code. It was to build better sentiment and make devs happier again. So knowing that, it's hard for me to believe that this is some crazy plot of the Microsoft team trying to destroy all of these forks. And I'm not that concerned about the future for them, especially because the languages I use are not affected at all. But that's how I feel right now. There's a very good chance I am wrong, more than in almost any of the videos I normally do. So I'll be sure to publish an updated video and leave a comment accordingly if it turns out I was wrong and life does get meaningfully harder for these forks. Hope that was fun. Until next time, peace nerds.